It is 1904, somewhere along the Congo River, and a company clerk is counting hands. Not workers. Hands. Severed ones, carried in from the forest in wicker baskets, laid out and tallied like currency, because that is essentially what they had become. Soldiers of the force public were required to account for every bullet they fired, and the proof of a bullet well spent was a human hand. If a soldier used ammunition hunting instead, or missed a shot, he simply took a hand from someone still breathing to make up the difference. All of it, every mutilated village, every burned hut, traced back to a quota. Araber quota. Because somewhere on the other side of the ocean, in schoolrooms and drafting offices and government ministries, people needed rubber, and a great deal of that rubber was headed for one destination: the ends of pencils. Small pink blocks that would be squeezed onto wood, sold for pennies, and used to rub out a mistake in an arithmetic notebook. But the story does not start here. It starts 134 years earlier, in a cramped instrument maker's shop on Cornhill Street in London. The year is 1770. Edward Nairn, an English optician and maker of scientific instruments, reaches across his workbench for a piece of stale bread. Bread, at the time, was the standard tool for removing pencil marks, soft, crumbly, faintly abrasive, and it had been the writer's eraser of choice since at least the early 1600s. But Nairn's hand closes on the wrong object. Instead of bread, he picks up a small lump of a strange elastic substance recently imported from South America, a gum the Spanish had encountered decades earlier and indigenous Amazonian peoples had used for centuries to waterproof cloth, mold containers, and bounce balls in ceremonial games. Nairn rubs it across his pencil marks almost by reflex, and the marks vanish cleanly, completely, in a way bread never managed. That same year, the chemist Joseph Priestley, yes, the same Priestley who would later help discover oxygen, wrote a short note describing this substance and its curious rubbing action. He called it simply rubber. The name stuck. Nairn began selling half-inch cubes of it out of his shop for 3 shillings apiece, an absurd price at the time, equivalent to a skilled laborer's wages for the better part of a day. For a scrap of gum you could lose in a coat pocket. Now step back even further, because Nairn and Priestley were not the first Europeans to notice this material. In 1751, a French scientist named François Fresneau, traveling through the Amazon basin on a geographic survey, wrote a report to the French Academy describing a milky sap the local Omagua people called caoutchouc, weeping wood. Europeans mangled the word into caoutchouc, and for the next several decades, it remained a scientific curiosity, an exotic sap known mostly to a handful of naturalists and instrument makers. Rubber, in other words, existed as an erasing tool almost by accident, tucked into the margins of European science for a full generation before anyone thought to sell it as a product. That is worth sitting with for a second. The eraser did not begin as an invention. It began as a mistake repeated by 2 different men 20 years apart on 2 different continents of intellectual history, until someone finally decided to put a price tag on it. Fast forward now 70 years to a very different kind of workshop. This one belongs to Charles Goodyear, an American hardware merchant turned obsessive rubber tinkerer, a man who by the mid-1830s had gone bankrupt more than once, chasing the dream of a rubber that would not melt in summer heat or crack apart in winter cold. Natural rubber, the stuff Nairn had sold in his London shop, was a nightmare of a material. It rotted. It stank. In warm weather, it turned into a gluey mess. In cold weather, it snapped like stale toffee. For decades, this instability nearly killed the entire rubber industry before it had a chance to grow. Then, in 1839, according to the story Goodyear himself told for the rest of his life, he accidentally dropped a mixture of rubber and sulfur onto a hot stove. Instead of melting, it charred into a firm, springy, weatherproof material. This decision, or rather, this accident, seemed small at the time. It was not. Goodyear spent the next several years refining what he called vulcanization, patenting the process in 1844, and in doing so, he handed the entire rubber industry a material that could finally survive a season, let alone a shelf. Vulcanized rubber transformed erasers from a luxury novelty that crumbled within weeks into a durable, mass, producible commodity. And it did something else, something far larger and far darker, which we will come back to. Move forward again to Philadelphia, 1858. A stationer named Hyman Lipman, born in Kingston, Jamaica, and raised from childhood in Pennsylvania, filed a patent for something almost embarrassingly obvious in hindsight: a wooden pencil with a small plug of rubber embedded directly into one end. U.S. patent number 19,783. Both the graphite and the rubber, according to the patent, could be sharpened. It seems like nothing. A pencil and an eraser glued together. But think about that for a second. Before Lipman, the pencil and the eraser were two separate objects that lived in two separate pockets, and people lost the small one constantly. Lipman's combination pencil became wildly popular almost overnight. In 1862, he sold the patent to a businessman named Joseph Reckendorfer for $100,000, several $1 million today. A fortune built on nothing but the idea of gluing two existing tools together. Reckendorfer, convinced he now owned a license to print money, sued the German pencil manufacturer Faber for infringement when Faber began producing its own eraser-tipped pencils without paying him a cent. The case climbed all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And in 1875, the court ruled against Reckendorfer, declaring Lipman's patent invalid. The reasoning was almost cruelly simple. Combining two already known objects, the justices said, with no genuinely new function created by the combination, was not an invention at all. It was rubbed out permanently in a single ruling. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not, because it meant no company anywhere had to pay royalties to attach an eraser to a pencil ever again. Faber, and every manufacturer that followed, was suddenly free to mass-produce the eraser-tipped pencil at scale, without licensing fees, without lawsuits, without friction. Reckendorfer lost his fortune. The pencil eraser, ironically, became more universal precisely because the man who owned it lost his legal claim to it. Which brings us to the dark chapter, the one this video opened with. By the final decades of the 19th century, the automobile, the bicycle, and industrial machinery had exploded global demand for rubber. Tires, hoses, gaskets, insulation, and yes, the humble eraser too, riding along as a minor beneficiary of an industry now worth staggering sums. And that demand collided with colonial greed in two places with horrifying results. In the Congo Free State, King Leopold II of Belgium, who personally owned the territory as a private estate and never once set foot in it, turned rubber extraction into a system of forced labor enforced through mutilation, hostage-taking, and mass killing. Historians' estimates of the death toll during Leopold's 23-year rule range from roughly 2 million to as high as 10 million people. Reports compiled by the British consul Roger Casement documented villages burned, families held ransom, and workers shot for missing daily rubber quotas, their hands severed as proof the bullets had been used correctly. Half a world away, in the Peruvian Amazon, rubber barons running the Putumayo trade enslaved and killed thousands of indigenous Huitoto and Bora people under nearly identical quota systems. None of these workers ever saw a finished eraser or a pencil or knew what their raw latex would become on the other side of the planet. They knew only the quota and what happened when it wasn't met. The eraser you might be holding right now, or one very much like it, sits at the far, comfortable end of a supply chain that once ran through some of the worst atrocities of the colonial era. And no, that is not something anyone made up. It is documented in consular reports, congressional testimony, and Belgian government commissions that, to this day, still argue over the exact number of dead. International outrage over the Congo atrocities, fueled by journalists, missionaries, and campaigners like Edmund Dean Morel and Roger Casement, eventually forced the Belgian government to strip Leopold of his private colony in 1908. It did not undo the deaths, but it did mark one of the first times in modern history that public pressure over a supply chain, a literal consumer product scandal, reshaped an empire's colonial policy. The eraser, in a strange and uncomfortable way, sits at the intersection of childhood mistakes and imperial violence, corrected homework and severed hands, and almost nobody who has ever chewed the top of a pencil in a classroom knows that history at all. The 20th century smoothed most of that violence out of public memory, in part because the material itself changed. Natural rubber remained dominant until the Second World War, when Japan's occupation of Southeast Asian rubber plantations cut off roughly 90% of America's supply almost overnight, forcing a crash program to develop synthetic alternatives. Companies including Goodyear, no relation to Charles by then, just borrowing the name, and DuPont raced to perfect synthetic rubbers derived from petroleum. And by the post-war decades, most erasers were no longer made from tap tree sap at all, but from synthetic rubber, and later from soft PVC vinyl compounds first popularized by companies like Faber-Castell's Pelican and Stettler in the 1950s and 60s. Vinyl erasers erased more cleanly, crumbled less, and severed the eraser, once and for all, from the plantation economies that had built it. Now, look at the scale today. Somewhere between 14 and 20 billion pencils are manufactured worldwide every single year. Enough laid end to end to circle the Earth more than 60 times over. The vast majority of those, especially in the American market, still carry a small rubber or vinyl cap at one end, held on by a thin metal band called a ferrule, a design essentially unchanged since Lippmann's 1858 patent. China now produces roughly half the world's pencils. A single German company, Faber-Castell, founded, remarkably, in 1761, 9 years before Nairn ever picked up that stray lump of rubber, manufactures more than 2 billion pencils a year on its own. Multiply that by however many billion tiny eraser tips are stamped, molded, and glued onto those pencils annually, and you are looking at one of the most quietly mass-produced objects in human history. An object almost nobody thinks about, made by the billions, thrown away by the billions, its origin story buried under a century and a half of convenience. Here is the twist nobody expects. NASA famously never let astronauts bring ordinary pencils into space in large numbers, because graphite dust and flammable wood shavings are a genuine fire hazard in a pressurized, oxygen-rich capsule, which is part of why this space pen myth exists. But the eraser's real future may not be in space at all. It may be in landfills and oceans. Every rubber and vinyl eraser sheds microscopic particles as it works, crumbs that scatter across desks and floors, and eventually, in staggering aggregate, into waterways, a genuinely understudied source of the microplastic pollution now found in human blood, in Arctic ice, in the deepest ocean trenches on Earth. The tool built to erase small mistakes may be quietly contributing to one we have not figured out how to erase at all. From a stolen crumb of bread, from a shop on Cornhill Street, from a lawsuit that gutted its own patent, from a colonial trade that cost millions of lives. The eraser became a schoolroom staple, a forgiveness machine for shaky arithmetic, a Supreme Court case, a quiet accomplice to empire, and now, somehow, a microplastic footnote in an environmental crisis nobody saw coming when Edward Nairn reached for his afternoon snack. It is, when you think about it, a genuinely strange thing that one of the most violent and lucrative commodity trades in modern history was partly fueled by humanity's need to pretend its mistakes never happened. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which part of the pencil eraser's history surprised you the most. And make sure to like this video so more people can find it.